The humidity hung over Fort Hemlock Combat Training Complex like a wet blanket, turning the Tennessee air thick enough to chew. This wasn't some weekend tactical course for civilians with disposable income. This was the proving ground where America's finest special forces operators came to sharpen their edge, where Delta Force veterans tested new techniques, and where the military's most elite shooters competed for contracts that could reshape modern warfare doctrine, the kind of place where legends were born and egos came to die. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Leah Brennan's Ford Ranger pulled into the gravel lot, its paint faded from too many years under an unforgiving sun, its bumper held on with zip ties and determination. She stepped out into the oppressive heat, squinting against the glare reflecting off the endless rows of tactical vehicles, each one worth more than most people earned in a year. At 32, she looked like she'd taken a wrong turn on her way to a hardware store. Her faded green cargo pants were worn thin at the knees, her black t-shirt had seen better decades, and her boots were military issue but so old they predated most of the operators gathered here. No plate carrier, no high-speed gear, no unit patches announcing her pedigree, just a weathered rifle case slung over her shoulder and a canvas pack that looked like it had survived multiple wars, which, if anyone had bothered to ask, it had. The main staging area buzzed with testosterone and barely contained competition. Operators clustered in tight groups, their conversations peppered with classified operation names dropped just loud enough for others to hear. Rifles gleamed with Cerakote finishes in custom colors. Optics cost more than luxury cars. Night vision devices hung from helmets like status symbols. Everyone spoke in the abbreviated language of Tier 1 operators, a verbal peacocking designed to establish pecking order before a single shot was fired. Leah found a spot at the far edge of the chaos, away from the clusters of alpha males measuring each other with sideways glances. She set her case down on a weathered wooden bench that looked original to the facility's construction decades ago. The zipper caught twice before opening, revealing a rifle that made several nearby shooters do double takes for all the wrong reasons. It was an M41A1, the Marine Corps sniper rifle from an era before modular everything and Picatinny rails. The wooden stock was scarred and worn smooth by countless hours of use. The bluing on the barrel faded in patches, and the scope, while clearly maintained with obsessive care, was a fixed-power honortal that most modern shooters only saw in museums. "Check out the museum piece," a voice cut through the ambient noise with the precision of someone used to being heard. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow stood with his arms crossed, his custom-built rifle adorned with enough accessories to stock a small armory. His name tape identified him as belonging to a Special Forces group, and he wore that identity like armor. He nudged his buddy, a stocky operator whose name tape read Vaughn, popped his gum with practiced disdain. "What is this, vintage firearms day?" Vaughn popped his gum with practiced disdain. "My grandfather's got one just like that collecting dust in his garage, right next to his 8-track player and his disco records." Leah's fingers never paused in their methodical work. She pulled a cloth from her pack, worn soft from years of service, and began cleaning her barrel with movements that were almost meditative, smooth, practiced, economical. Each motion spoke of muscle memory built over thousands of repetitions, the kind of familiarity that came from a relationship with a weapon that transcended mere equipment. A woman approached, her tactical boots barely making a sound despite their aggressive tread. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton carried herself with the particular brand of authority that came from commanding men in combat and never quite letting go of that power in peacetime. Her rifle was art, a custom-built precision instrument with a carbon fiber stock, a Schmidt & Bender scope that cost more than some cars, and a suppressor that probably required months of paperwork to acquire legally.
"You're in the wrong place, sweetheart," Thornton said, her voice loud enough to draw every eye within 50 yards. Her tone carried the kind of condescension that was somehow worse than outright hostility, the verbal equivalent of patting someone on the head while showing them the door. "This facility is for active duty special operations personnel and vetted contractors with security clearances. This isn't a public range where anyone can just show up and play soldier." She leaned in closer, her eyes scanning Leah's worn gear with obvious distaste. Why don't you save yourself the embarrassment and leave before you make a complete fool of yourself in front of people who actually know what they're doing? The crowd ate it up. A few operators actually clapped, their laughter sharp and mean, designed to cut rather than amuse. It was the kind of group dynamic that fed on itself, each person emboldened by the mob mentality that made cruelty feel like camaraderie. Leah's fingers tightened on the cloth for just a fraction of a second, so brief you might have missed it if you weren't watching closely. Then they relaxed, continuing their steady rhythm. She slid the bolt back with a smooth, practiced motion, checked the chamber with the kind of attention most people reserved for precious things, and set the rifle down with reverence. Thornton huffed, satisfied with her performance, and turned away. But her words hung in the humid air like smoke, poisoning the atmosphere and marking Leah as the day's designated punching bag. A young trainer, barely into his 20s and clearly drunk on the small amount of authority his clipboard granted him, strutted over with the swagger of someone who'd never been punched in the mouth for running it. His radio crackled on his hip like a prop in a movie, more theater than function. "Hey there, ma'am," he called out, making sure his voice carried to the gathered operators. The false politeness in his tone was somehow more insulting than if he'd just been openly rude. "You sure you're at the right facility? The civilian recreation range is about 20 miles north. Easy mistake to make." The laughter that followed was designed to wound. A woman in a tight tactical jacket, her fingernails painted in some shade between red and burgundy that probably had a name like arterial spray, gave Leah a slow once-over that managed to be more devastating than any words. "Those boots," she muttered to her friend, a blonde whose outfit looked like it came straight from a tactical gear Instagram account, all matching earth tones and carefully curated authenticity. "My dad wore a pair just like them in Desert Storm 30 years ago." The blonde wrinkled her nose with practiced disgust. "And that rifle? I've seen better weapons at estate sales, usually right next to the boxes of National Geographic magazines and broken lawn equipment." Leah's hand paused on the bolt for half a heartbeat. Then she slid it back with a soft, final click that somehow cut through the noise. She gave a small nod, seemingly to herself, and set the rifle down. The metal felt cool against her palm despite the oppressive heat, familiar as an old friend's handshake. But something in her stillness, in the economy of her movements, caught the attention of one person in the crowd. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke, a grizzled instructor with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much in too many classified places, stood watching from the shadows cast by the main facility building. His name tape was faded, his uniform worn but immaculate, and unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. He was remembering. His eyes had caught something the others missed: the way she moved, the breathing pattern, the absolute economy of motion that came from training so ingrained it became unconscious. And there, on the stock of that ancient rifle, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a mark, deliberate, precise, a signature carved by someone who understood that some things were worth marking permanently. Rourke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His fingers began to twitch like he was piecing together a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for over a decade. Because he'd seen that mark before. Once. In a classified briefing that officially never happened, about an operator who officially never existed. They called her the Riverine Shade. And if the rumors were even half true, everyone in this facility was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between equipment and skill.
The weapons qualification area was designed for humiliation as much as assessment. Long tables stretched under canvas awnings, each station marked with rangefinder equipment, ballistic calculators, and all the tools modern precision shooting demanded. Operators gathered like wolves around fresh meat, their attention focused on the day's entertainment. The woman with the museum-piece rifle who clearly didn't belong. Captain Donovan Reed held court near the center table, his custom rifle propped against his shoulder like a fashion accessory. His gear alone probably cost $40,000, every piece carefully selected and loudly discussed. The logos on his kit told a story of sponsors and endorsements, of a shooting career built as much on social media presence as actual skill. "I'm taking bets," Reed announced, his voice carrying across the area with practiced projection. "Over-under on how many shots before she quits and goes home. I'm saying 3, maybe 4 if she's got more pride than sense." Corporal Silas Vaughn, the stocky operator who'd mocked her earlier, pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going straight to the group chat," he said with a grin that showed too many teeth. "The guys back at Bragg are gonna love this. Wannabe operator shows up to Fort Hemlock with Grandpa's deer rifle." The laughter rippled through the crowd like a wave, each person feeding off the other's cruelty. It was the kind of mob mentality that turned decent people into participants in something uglier than they'd ever admit to being individually. Leah continued her preparation with the same methodical precision she'd shown since arriving. She pulled out a small notebook, its cover worn and water-stained, and made a few notations in handwriting so precise it looked almost mechanical. Wind speed, humidity, temperature, barometric pressure, all recorded with the kind of attention most people reserved for sacred texts. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow couldn't let it go. He approached Leah's station with the swagger of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. His custom Barrett MRAD gleamed with fresh Cerakote, its scope worth more than most people's cars. "Let me give you some friendly advice," he said, his tone suggesting the advice would be anything but friendly. "This facility isn't for hobbyists. We're talking about operators who've put rounds downrange in every shithole from Kandahar to Mogadishu, guys who've stacked bodies in places that don't exist on any map." He gestured at her rifle with obvious disdain. "That antique might work for punching paper at your local FUD range, but here, you're gonna embarrass yourself. Probably dangerous, too. When's the last time that thing was even test-fired? Carter administration?" Leah's fingers continued their work, adjusting her scope with micro-precision. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge his presence. The silence was somehow more cutting than any response could have been. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton watched from her position near the command tent, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd built her reputation on being the toughest officer in the facility, the one who didn't suffer fools or pretenders. Having someone like Leah here was a gift, an easy target to reinforce the hierarchy and remind everyone that standards mattered. "She doesn't even have the right gear," she said to her assistant, a young lieutenant who hung on her every word like gospel. "No rangefinder, no ballistic calculators, no wind meter. She's got a notebook and a pen like this is 1970. It's almost sad." The assistant nodded eagerly. "Should we ask her to leave, ma'am, for safety reasons?" "Not yet," Thornton replied, her smile widening. "Let her fail first. Let everyone see what happens when you show up unprepared and overconfident. It'll be a teaching moment." A retired operator named Garrett Mullins, his beard gone gray and his gut gone soft, approached Leah's station with the kind of authority that came from past glory and present irrelevance. His name tape identified him as former Special Forces, and he wore that identity like a shield against the reality that his best years were behind him.
"Sweetheart, I've been doing this for 30 years, he said, his voice dripping with false concern that fooled no one. "I've trained with the best, competed against the best, and put more rounds downrange than you've probably seen in your life. Trust me when I tell you that you're out of your depth." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it seem like he was offering genuine advice rather than public humiliation. "There's no shame in admitting you don't belong. Save yourself the embarrassment and pack it up. Come back when you've got the experience and equipment to compete at this level." Leah set down her cleaning cloth with deliberate care. For the first time since arriving, she looked directly at Mullins. Her eyes were calm, steady, but there was something underneath them that made him take an involuntary half-step back. She didn't say a word, just held his gaze for 3 seconds that felt like an hour, then went back to her work. The crowd murmured at this silent exchange. Some saw weakness, a woman too intimidated to even defend herself. Others, the few with actual combat experience rather than just training credentials, saw something different. They saw the kind of calm that came from genuine confidence, the kind you couldn't fake or buy. But most of them saw what they wanted to see, an easy target, someone to mock, someone whose failure would make them all feel better about their own insecurities.
A young specialist named Tommy Weston, barely 20 years old and working as a range assistant to help pay for college, approached Leah's station with a water bottle. He was the kind of kid who was invisible to most of the operators, beneath their notice, just part of the background noise. "Ma'am?" he said quietly, his voice almost swallowed by the ambient noise. "You need anything? Water? Extra ammunition?" Leah looked up, and for the first time that day, something in her expression softened slightly. "I'm good, thank you. What's your name?" "Tommy, ma'am. Tommy Weston." "You a shooter, Tommy?" The kid's face lit up despite his obvious nervousness. "Learning, ma'am. My dad was Army. He used to talk about this operator he met once in Thailand. Said the guy could hit targets nobody else could even see. Called him the Riverine Shade. Said he was like a ghost, there 1 second, gone the next, and targets just dropped." Leah's hand stilled on her rifle for just a moment. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Your dad sounds like a smart man." "He was, ma'am. He passed 2 years ago, but he always said the best operators were the ones nobody talked about, the quiet ones." Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke, who'd been watching this exchange from his position near the equipment shed, felt another piece click into place. The mark on the rifle, the movement patterns, and now this, a kid mentioning the Riverine Shade without knowing he was standing 3 feet from the legend herself. Rourke had been in the briefing room 13 years ago when they'd shown the satellite footage. A single operator moving through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate, taking shots that shouldn't have been possible to make. The analysts had tracked 17 confirmed kills in 48 hours, all in conditions that would have gotten most snipers killed. They never got a clear photo, just heat signatures, trajectory analysis, and the aftermath. But there had been a mark left behind, carved in a tree where the final shot had been taken. A signature. The same signature he'd just seen on that rifle stock. The crowd continued their mockery, oblivious to the truth standing in their midst. They saw worn equipment and quiet demeanor and assumed weakness. They measured worth in dollars spent and volume of voice, in patches and credentials and social media followers. They had no idea they were circling a predator who'd forgotten more about precision shooting than most of them would ever learn. And they were about to find out the hard way.
The pre-qualification inspection was supposed to be a formality, a quick safety check to ensure all weapons met basic standards. But for Leah Brennan, it became another opportunity for the crowd to feed their egos at her expense. The inspection station was manned by a contractor named Derek Hutchins, a former Marine who'd parlayed 20 years of service into a cushy consulting gig that paid 3 times what active duty ever had. His gut hung over his belt. His uniform was contractor casual, but his attitude was pure brass. He'd seen thousands of rifles come through his station, and he took pride in his ability to spot substandard equipment from across the range. When Leah approached with her M40A1, his face went through a journey of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally something close to offense. "You're kidding me," he said, not even trying to hide his disdain. He picked up the rifle like it might contaminate him, his fingers barely touching the worn stock. "This thing is older than most of the operators here. When's the last time this was properly serviced? Reagan administration?" The crowd that had gathered behind Leah chuckled on cue. They'd been following her around like sharks who'd caught the scent of blood, waiting for the next opportunity to confirm their superiority. Hutchins made a show of examining the rifle, his disapproval growing with each component he inspected. Fixed power scope, no cant indicator, no level, no ballistic turrets. He set it down with more force than necessary. "Lady, this might have been state-of-the-art when your grandfather was humping through Da Nang, but this is a precision shooting facility. We've got standards." Leah pulled out a small folder from her pack, its edges worn, but the contents pristine. She set it on the inspection table without a word. Inside were maintenance logs, barrel life calculations, and grouping data that would have impressed any serious shooter who bothered to look. Hutchins barely glanced at it. "Paperwork doesn't change the fact that you're bringing a museum piece to a modern warfare facility." He looked past her to the crowd, playing to his audience.
We've got people here shooting platforms that cost more than some cars, equipment that's been tested in every theater, from Afghanistan to Syria, and you show up with something that belongs in a display case. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton appeared at the inspection station like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. She'd traded her rifle for a clipboard, her new weapon of choice for cutting people down without firing a shot. "Hutchins, what's the holdup?" she asked, though her tone made clear she already knew the answer. "Ma'am, this weapon doesn't meet the facility standards for the advanced qualification course. It's outdated, lacks modern sighting systems, and frankly, represents a safety concern." Thornton picked up Leah's rifle, examining it with the kind of theatrical disgust that was clearly meant for the gathered crowd. "This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. We can't compromise our standards just because someone shows up with enthusiasm and inadequate equipment." She turned to Leah, her expression a mix of false sympathy and genuine satisfaction. "Miss Brennan, I'm sure you mean well, but this facility caters to a specific caliber of shooter. We have insurance requirements, liability concerns, and a reputation to maintain. I'm going to have to ask you to pack up your equipment and leave the premises." The crowd's murmur of approval was immediate. This was the natural order being restored. The pretender was being shown the door, and the world made sense again. Captain Donovan Reed stepped forward, his phone out and recording. "This is going to make a great cautionary tale," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What happens when you show up unprepared to a professional facility? No hard feelings, sweetheart, but maybe stick to the local range until you're ready for the big leagues." Leah stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Thornton. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried a quality that made several nearby operators unconsciously lean in to hear better. "What specific regulation am I violating?" Thornton blinked, clearly not expecting to be questioned. "Excuse me? You said I don't meet facility standards. What specific written regulation does my weapon violate?" The question hung in the humid air like a challenge. Hutchins shuffled papers on his desk, suddenly less confident. Thornton's jaw tightened. "The spirit of the regulations."
"I'm asking about the letter of them," Leah interrupted, her voice still quiet, but now edged with something that made Thornton take half a step back. "Does my weapon have a functional firing pin? Yes. Is the barrel obstruction-free? Yes. Does it meet the minimum caliber requirements posted on your facility guidelines? Yes. So which specific written regulation am I violating?" Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke, who had been watching this entire exchange from his position near the armory, felt a chill run down his spine. He'd heard that tone before, in briefing rooms, in operational planning sessions, from people who knew exactly what the rules were because they'd operated in the gray spaces between them for years. Thornton's face flushed. "The equipment standards are clearly suggestions," Leah finished for her. "Your facility guidelines, which I read in their entirety last night, state that all weapons must be safe and functional. They do not specify minimum equipment standards beyond caliber and basic safety features. Everything else is recommended, not required." The crowd had gone quiet. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. The pretender was supposed to slink away in shame, not stand there calmly dismantling the facility commander's authority with regulations and logic. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow couldn't let it stand. "Even if you technically qualify, you're still going to embarrass yourself. You're bringing a knife to a gunfight. That rifle might be legal, but it's obsolete. You'll be lucky to hit paper at distance while the rest of us are punching bullseyes." "Then there's no harm in letting me try," Leah replied simply. "If I'm as incompetent as you all seem to believe, I'll fail the qualification and leave. If not," she let the sentence hang unfinished, the implication clear. Thornton was trapped, and she knew it. In front of dozens of operators, many of whom were recording on their phones, she'd just been called out on her arbitrary exercise of authority. If she pushed any harder, it would look like she was afraid of being shown up. "Fine,"
she said through gritted teeth. "You can stay for the initial qualification, but when you fail to make the cut, you leave immediately. No second chances, no excuses." "Fair enough," Leah said, taking her rifle back from Hutchins' inspection table. She returned it to her case with the same careful reverence she'd shown all day. As she walked away, Tommy Weston, the young range assistant, caught up to her with a bottle of water. "That was pretty badass, ma'am. Nobody talks to Colonel Thornton like that." "I didn't talk to her like anything. I just asked her to follow her own rules. Still, most people would have just left." Leah paused, looking back at the crowd that was still buzzing about the confrontation. "Tommy, you know what the difference is between someone who's actually good at something and someone who just has expensive equipment?" "What's that, ma'am?" "The person who's actually good doesn't need rules bent in their favor. They just need the rules applied fairly." Rourke watched this exchange from a distance, his mind racing. The mark on the rifle, the movement patterns, the calm in the face of hostility, the precise knowledge of regulations, and now this, the quiet confidence of someone who'd operated in environments where knowing the rules could mean the difference between mission success and international incident. He pulled out his phone and made a call to a number that wasn't in any official directory. When the voice on the other end answered, Rourke spoke quietly. "I need you to pull a file for me. Project Riverine, Southeast Asia Operations 2012 to 2018. Specifically, I need confirmation on the Shade's current status." There was a pause, then, "That's classified above your clearance, Master Sergeant." "I know what my clearance level is, and I'm telling you that if I'm right about what I'm seeing, we've got a situation that needs immediate attention. The Shade might be here, at Hemlock, right now." There was a pause, longer this time, then, "Stand by." Rourke hung up and watched as Leah settled back at her station, calmly continuing her preparation like nothing had happened. Around her, the operators were already spinning the confrontation to fit their narrative. She'd gotten lucky with a technicality. She'd embarrassed herself by making a scene. She was trying to hide her incompetence behind regulations. They had no idea what was coming. And Rourke almost felt sorry for them.
The Reflex qualification was designed to separate competent shooters from exceptional ones. 5 steel targets at varying distances, appearing in random sequence, 7 seconds to engage them all. Miss one, and you were done. No excuses, no second chances. It was the kind of test that revealed who actually had skills versus who just had expensive equipment and unearned confidence. The crowd gathered around the firing line like spectators at a gladiator arena, phones out and ready to capture the failures and occasional successes. The morning humidity had given way to oppressive afternoon heat, turning the range into a pressure cooker of testosterone and competition. Captain Donovan Reed went first, his custom rifle already shouldered before the buzzer sounded. He was fast, aggressive, the kind of shooter who relied on speed to compensate for precision. The targets popped up in sequence: 100 meters, 150, 200, 75, 180. His rifle cracked 5 times in quick succession. 4 targets rang with hits. 1 remained standing at 150 meters. "Goddamn mirage," Reed muttered, adjusting his scope like the atmospheric conditions were to blame rather than his technique. "Heat shimmer threw off my sight picture." The crowd murmured sympathetically, accepting his excuse without question. A few operators clapped anyway, acknowledging the effort even if the result fell short. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow stepped up next, his Barrett MRAD gleaming in the harsh sunlight. He took his time, his breathing steady and controlled, waiting for the targets with the patience of someone who'd actually spent time in hides, waiting for high-value targets. The buzzer sounded. Targets appeared. His rifle spoke with authority. Crack, 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 crack. 5 shots, 5 hits. The steel plates sang their defeat, ringing across the range in perfect sequence. 6.2 seconds. The crowd erupted in genuine approval. That was the kind of performance they'd come to see. The validation that expensive equipment and professional training produced results.
"That's how it's done," Harlow said, his grin wide and satisfied. He'd just set the bar high, and he knew it. 6 seconds flat. Let's see the amateurs try to match that. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton managed 4 out of 5, her miss coming on the closest target in a moment of overconfidence that made her jaw tighten with barely contained fury. She walked off the line without a word, her embarrassment hidden behind a mask of professional detachment. Corporal Silas Vaughn went 3 for 5. Garrett Mullins, the retired operator, managed 4, but took nearly 8 seconds, disqualifying him on time, even though his hits were solid. One by one, the operators cycled through. Some hit all 5, but took too long. Others were fast but inaccurate. A handful managed to thread the needle, hitting all 5 within the time limit. Their celebrations measured but genuine. Then, it was Leah's turn. She stepped to the line with that same unhurried pace that had characterized everything she'd done since arriving. Her M40A1 looked almost primitive compared to the modern precision instruments that had preceded it. No electronic aids, no advanced optics, just glass and metal and wood worn smooth by years of use. "This ought to be good," someone muttered in the crowd, phones lifted, ready to capture what they assumed would be an embarrassing failure. The young range officer, still drunk on his minor authority, couldn't resist one last jab. "Ma'am, you sure you don't want to sit this one out? No shame in recognizing your limitations. This test is designed for professionals with professional equipment." Leah didn't acknowledge him. She simply shouldered her rifle, her stance relaxed but ready, like a coiled spring waiting for release. Her breathing slowed, became almost imperceptible. Her eyes fixed on the downrange area with the kind of focus that suggested she was seeing something the rest of them couldn't. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke watched from his position near the tower, his phone still warm from his classified call. He'd seen this stance before, in grainy satellite footage, in after-action reports that were classified above top secret, in the nightmares of enemy combatants who'd survived encounters with the riverine shade and lived to whisper warnings to their comrades. The buzzer sounded.
Targets erupted into view in random sequence. 180 meters, 100, 75, 200, 150. 5 locations, 7 seconds, the clock already ticking. Leah's rifle moved like it was part of her nervous system rather than a separate tool. Fluid, inevitable, faster than conscious thought should allow. Her body didn't shift positions so much as flow between them, each movement economical and precise. Crack. The 180-meter target rang before most shooters would have even acquired it in their scope. Crack. The 100-meter plate sang its metallic song. Crack. 75 meters down. Crack. 200 meters, the farthest target, dropped with authority. Crack. 150 meters, the final plate hit center mass. The electronic timer displayed the result in harsh red numbers, 4.1 seconds. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Phones recorded the stunned faces of operators whose worldview had just been demolished by an ancient rifle and a woman they'd dismissed as a pretender. Rourke checked his stopwatch, then checked it again, his hands trembling slightly. 4.1 seconds, 5 targets, perfect hits. With equipment that most of these operators wouldn't trust to hunt deer, much less compete at an elite facility. "Equipment malfunction," someone in the crowd finally said, their voice desperate for any explanation that made sense. "The timer must have glitched." "Run it again," Captain Donovan Reed demanded, his face pale beneath his tan. "There's no way that time is accurate. Nobody shoots that fast with a bolt action. It's physically impossible." The range officer checked his equipment, his hands shaking slightly. "Timer's functioning normally, sir. All targets registered hits. Time stands at 4.1 seconds. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with something between rage and disbelief. "That was clearly a fluke. One good run doesn't prove anything. Probably just got lucky with target placement." Leah lowered her rifle, her breathing still steady and controlled. She pulled a small rag from her pocket and wiped down the bolt with the same methodical care she'd shown all day. She didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't even acknowledge the stunned silence.
She might as well have been at a local range practicing on a Tuesday afternoon for all the emotion she displayed. Luck doesn't work like that, Rourke said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise. He stepped forward from his position in the shadows, his weathered face grave. That target sequence was randomized. She couldn't have known the order, and that bolt manipulation speed, the way she transitioned between positions, that's not something you learn from YouTube videos or weekend training courses. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow, his earlier confidence shaken, tried to salvage his authority. One fast run doesn't make her a professional. I've seen plenty of amateurs get lucky once and then fall apart under real pressure. Wait until we get to the actual precision challenges. That's where real skill shows. The crowd latched onto this narrative like drowning men grabbing a life raft. Yes, luck, a fluke. Probably practiced that specific drill 1,000 times. Wait until she has to adapt, to think, to perform under the kind of pressure that separates tourists from operators. But Tommy Weston, the young range assistant, stood off to the side with a water bottle in his trembling hands. He'd watched his father's old videos, heard the stories about the riverine shade, about an operator who moved through enemy territory like smoke, whose shots came from nowhere and everywhere, whose speed was matched only by their precision. His father had described exactly that kind of shooting, the fluid transitions, the impossible speed, the absolute economy of motion that made it look effortless. He looked at Leah, who was calmly checking her rifle as if she'd just completed a routine training exercise rather than shattered the facility record by nearly 2 full seconds, and he realized, with the chill that ran down his spine despite the oppressive heat, everyone here was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being good with money and being good with a rifle.
The advanced shooter's tent was supposed to be sacred ground, a place where only the elite gathered after proving themselves worthy. But Leah's performance had thrown the entire facility into chaos, and the tent had become a war room where egos went to mount their last defense against an uncomfortable truth. Captain Donovan Reed sat at the center table, his custom rifle disassembled for cleaning that it probably didn't need. His hands moved with practiced precision, but his jaw was tight with frustration. Around him, a dozen operators who'd made the cut for advanced qualifications tried to process what they'd just witnessed. It was a fluke, Reed said for the 3rd time, his voice gaining confidence with each repetition. Nobody shoots that fast with a bolt action. I don't care what her time says. There had to be an equipment error, or she got impossibly lucky with target placement, or something. Physics doesn't just stop working because someone shows up with an old rifle. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow nodded, but his agreement looked forced. The precision tests are what matter anyway. Moving targets are one thing, but hitting a specific point at distance in field conditions, that's where we'll see if she's actually got skills or if today was just her one moment of glory. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton entered the tent, her face still flushed from her own mediocre performance. She'd been beaten by someone she'd tried to exclude from the facility entirely, and the embarrassment was eating at her like acid. I've been reviewing her registration, Thornton announced, her voice carrying forced authority. There are irregularities. Her background check came back clean, but she's listed as independent contractor with no unit affiliation, no competitive shooting record, no verifiable training history. For all we know, she could have falsified her credentials. Corporal Silas Vaughn looked up from his phone, where he'd been reviewing the footage of Leah's run frame by frame, trying to find some flaw or trick that would explain the impossible. Should we file a formal complaint, get her disqualified on administrative grounds? And look like we're scared of her? Reed snapped. That's exactly what she wants. No, we handle this the right way. We challenge her to something that actually proves skill, not just reaction time. Something that requires real training, real experience, real mastery. The tent went quiet as everyone processed this. The idea had merit. If they could design a challenge so difficult that even experienced operators struggled with it, they could expose her earlier performance as the anomaly they needed it to be.
Garrett Mullins, the retired operator, whose gut had grown soft but whose ego remained rock hard, leaned forward with a grin that showed too many teeth. When I was downrange in Fallujah, we had to make shots through vehicle windshields. Angle, refraction, bullet deflection. It's one of the hardest shots in practical combat shooting. We could set up a simulation. Even better, Reed said, his eyes lighting up with malicious creativity. We make it a moving target through angled glass at 600 meters. I've been training that specific scenario for 6 months with ballistic consultants and custom ammunition. There's no way someone with her setup could make that shot. It requires specialized equipment, specific training, and experience she clearly doesn't have. Thornton considered this, her mind already calculating the angles. If they could publicly challenge Leah to an impossible task and watch her fail, it would restore the natural order. The earlier performance would be dismissed as luck, and everyone could go back to the comfortable hierarchy where expensive equipment and credentials mattered more than quiet competence. "Make it interesting," she said. "Put money on it. Make her refuse or accept terms that guarantee she'll be humiliated either way." Reed's grin widened. He pulled out his wallet, thick with cash that came from sponsorship deals and social media partnerships. $20,000 says she can't make the shot. 1 attempt, no practice rounds, no excuses. She makes it, she gets the money. She misses, she leaves the facility immediately and admits she got lucky today. The tent erupted in approval. This was perfect. Either she would refuse and look like a coward, taking the wind out of her earlier success, or she'd accept and fail spectacularly, giving them all the validation they desperately needed. Leah was outside the tent, sitting cross-legged under a pine tree that provided the only real shade in the area. Her rifle lay across her lap, and she was making notes in that same worn notebook, her handwriting precise and deliberate. Tommy Weston had brought her water and a protein bar, which she had accepted with quiet thanks.
Reed emerged from the tent with his entourage behind him, phones out and recording, ready to capture this moment for posterity and social media. The crowd that gathered was larger now, word having spread about the morning's events. Even operators who'd already been eliminated stuck around to see what would happen next. "Miss Brennan," Reed called out, his voice carrying theatrical projection, "I've got a proposition for you. Since you seem to think your equipment and skills are adequate for this facility, how about you prove it with something that requires real expertise?" Leah looked up from her notebook, her expression calm and mildly curious, like Reed was a bird that had landed nearby rather than someone trying to publicly humiliate her. "I'm proposing a challenge," Reed continued, pulling out his wallet and making a show of counting bills. $20,000. 1 shot. Moving target at 600 meters through angled automotive glass. You make the shot, the money's yours. You miss, you pack up and leave, and you admit that today was just beginner's luck. You game? The crowd murmured with anticipation. This was the kind of drama they'd come to see. This was entertainment and validation rolled into one perfect package. Lieutenant Colonel Thornton stepped forward, adding her authority to the challenge. "I'll make it official. This will be a sanctioned facility challenge under my oversight. All participants will sign waivers and the result will be entered into facility records. No disputes, no arguments afterward." Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow couldn't resist piling on. That shot requires custom ammunition, specialized optics, and training most shooters never get. With that antique rifle, you'd need a miracle. But hey, if you want to embarrass yourself one more time before leaving, be my guest. Leah closed her notebook with deliberate care and stood up, brushing pine needles from her cargo pants. She looked at Reed, then at Thornton, then at the crowd of operators who were all recording this moment, their phones held high like offerings at an altar. "1 shot," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise with unexpected clarity. "Moving target, 600 meters through angled glass, $20,000. "That's right," Reed confirmed, his grin triumphant. He thought he'd won already, thought she'd either refuse or accept and fail. Either way, the natural order would be restored. "And when I make the shot," Leah continued, her eyes meeting Reed's with absolute calm, "the money goes to the facility's junior marksmanship program, for kids like Tommy here who want to learn but can't afford the equipment." The crowd went silent. That hadn't been part of anyone's script. "Deal," Reed said quickly before anyone could process the implications. 1 hour.
Main range. Bring your museum piece and your beginner's luck, because you're going to need both. As the crowd dispersed to prepare for the challenge, Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke finally received the callback he'd been waiting for. The voice on the other end was cold and official. Project Rivering is still classified, Master Sergeant, but I can confirm that the Shade's last known location before going dark was Southeast Asia, 2018. Primary area of operations was riverine environments, hence the designation. Combat record is sealed, but I can tell you that when she disappeared, 3 different foreign intelligence agencies celebrated. She? Rourke repeated. The Shade's gender was classified to protect operational security. If you're looking at who I think you're looking at, Master Sergeant, I suggest you make sure nobody does anything stupid. That operator has more confirmed eliminations than your entire facility combined, and she made them all look like accidents. Rourke hung up and watched as Leah walked toward the main range, her ancient rifle over her shoulder, looking like she was headed to a casual day at the range rather than a challenge designed to humiliate her. She wasn't just good. She was legendary, and an entire facility full of operators who'd mistaken equipment for skill was about to learn what real expertise looked like.
The main range had transformed into an amphitheater of anticipation. Word had spread beyond Fort Hemlock, and operators from neighboring facilities had driven over to witness what was being called either the upset of the decade or the most spectacular failure in tactical shooting history. The crowd numbered over 100 now, phones out, bets being placed, the air thick with humidity and barely contained excitement. The challenge setup was deliberately cruel. At 600 meters downrange, a sedan chassis had been mounted on a motorized track that moved it laterally at variable speeds. The windshield was installed at a 35-degree angle, authentic automotive glass that would refract and deflect a bullet's path in unpredictable ways. Behind the glass, a torso-sized target with a 6-inch circle marked center mass. Captain Donovan Reed stood near the firing line, his arms crossed, his expression smug. He'd spent 6 months training for this exact scenario with a ballistics consultant who charged $300 an hour. He knew the mathematics, the bullet drop, the refraction angles, the lead calculations for the moving target. He'd made the shot exactly twice in 50 attempts with custom match-grade ammunition and a rifle that cost more than most people's cars. There was no way someone with Leah's equipment could make it. The challenge wasn't just difficult, it was designed to be impossible for anyone without specialized training and gear. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton stood at the control station, her hand on the switch that would activate the motorized track. Her earlier embarrassment had transformed into something colder and more calculating. This was her chance to restore order, to prove that standards and credentials mattered, to show that morning's performance had been nothing but an anomaly. "Rules are simple," Thornton announced, her voice amplified by the PA system so everyone could hear. "One shot, no practice rounds. The target will begin moving when I activate the track. Miss the 6-inch circle, you lose. Hit it, you win. Time limit is 30 seconds from track activation to shot fired." She turned to Leah, who stood at the firing line, with her M40A1 looking almost serene despite the pressure. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? There's no shame in recognizing when you're outmatched. You can walk away right now and keep whatever dignity you earned this morning." Leah pulled her rifle from its case, the worn wood and faded metal looking almost tragic next to the advanced equipment surrounding her. She settled into her shooting position, her movements economical and precise, like she was following a choreography she'd performed 1,000 times before. "I'm ready," she said simply. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow couldn't resist one final jab. "That rifle doesn't even have the ballistic calculator you'd need for this shot. You're going to be guessing at corrections that require mathematics and precision equipment. But hey, maybe you'll get lucky twice in one day. Stranger things have happened." The crowd murmured their agreement. This was the validation they needed. The morning's performance would be exposed as luck, and order would be restored to the universe. Tommy Weston stood at the back of the crowd, his hands clenched into fists. He'd heard his father's stories about the riverine shade, about shots made in conditions that defied explanation, about an operator who could calculate wind,
distance, and target movement faster than most people could pull a trigger. His father had said the legend wasn't about equipment or technology. It was about something deeper, something that couldn't be taught in schools or bought with money. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke watched from his position near the tower, his phone call still fresh in his mind. 3 foreign intelligence agencies had celebrated when the shade disappeared. That meant confirmed eliminations that had reshaped regional power structures. That meant shots made under operational conditions these operators couldn't even imagine. And they thought this challenge was impossible? Thornton's hand hovered over the activation switch. Last chance to back out. "Activate the track," Leah said, her voice carrying across the range with quiet authority. The motor whirred into life. The sedan chassis began moving laterally, its speed variable and unpredictable, controlled by a randomized program designed to prevent pattern recognition. The windshield caught the afternoon sun, creating glare and refraction that made the target behind it shimmer and dance like a mirage. Leah's breathing slowed, her body settled into absolute stillness, the kind of immobility that seemed almost supernatural. Her eye found the scope, and for several seconds, she simply observed, calculating, measuring, reading variables that weren't visible to anyone else.
The crowd held its breath. Phone cameras recorded from dozens of angles. Somewhere in the back, someone was live streaming this to a tactical shooting forum with thousands of people were watching in real time. 10 seconds passed. The target continued its erratic movement. Reed's smirk widened. She was hesitating, overwhelmed by the complexity of the shot, realizing too late that she'd accepted a challenge beyond her capabilities. 15 seconds. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. She was going to time out. She was going to forfeit. The natural order was being restored. 20 seconds. Leah's finger moved to the trigger. Her breathing stopped entirely, her body achieving absolute stillness. 23 seconds. The rifle cracked with sharp finality. The sound echoed across the range, followed by the unmistakable metallic ring of steel being struck. The monitoring station's computer chirped immediately, its sensors confirming impact. The crowd surged toward the observation screens, pushing and shoving to see the results. The high-resolution camera zoomed in on the target downrange, and the image appeared on multiple monitors throughout the facility. The bullet had punched through the angled windshield, compensating for refraction with mathematical precision, and struck the target dead center of the 6-inch circle. Not just inside it, center mass. Perfect. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Over 100 operators, many with decades of experience and millions of dollars in equipment, stood staring at screens that showed something that shouldn't have been possible. Captain Donovan Reed's face went through a journey of emotions: disbelief, denial, shock, and finally something close to nausea. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, no words coming out. "Equipment malfunction," someone in the crowd finally said, their voice desperate and hollow. "The sensors must have glitched. There's no way that shot was accurate." Thornton's hands were shaking as she checked the monitoring equipment. "All systems functioning normally," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Confirmed hit, center mass, 6-inch circle." Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow stood frozen, his expensive rifle feeling like a toy in his hands. He trained for years, spent tens of thousands on equipment and instruction, and he couldn't have made that shot with unlimited attempts and perfect conditions. She made it with one bullet, an antique rifle, and fixed power optics that belonged in a museum. Garrett Mullins, the retired operator whose gut had gone soft but whose pride remained intact, pushed through the crowd toward the firing line. "Let's see the rifle. She must have custom ammunition, specialized loads, something that gave her an advantage we didn't account for." Leah calmly ejected the spent casing and handed it to him. Standard factory ammunition. Nothing special. The kind you could buy at any sporting goods store for $30 a box. The crowd was beginning to fracture. Some operators were already slipping away, unwilling to be associated with what was becoming a historic humiliation. Others stood transfixed, unable to process what they'd witnessed.
Reed counted out $20,000 in cash with trembling hands, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. He handed the stack to Leah, who accepted it without celebration or gloating, then immediately handed it to Tommy Weston. For the junior marksmanship program, make sure kids who can't afford equipment get a chance to learn. Tommy took the money with shaking hands, tears in his eyes. Yes, ma'am. My dad would have loved this. He always said the best operators were the quiet ones. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke stepped forward, his weathered face grave. He'd been waiting for this moment, and he couldn't put it off any longer. That shot wasn't luck. That technique, that compensation for refraction and target movement with fixed power optics, that's not something you learn from instruction manuals or YouTube videos. He looked directly at Leah, and something passed between them. Recognition, acknowledgement, the end of a secret that had been kept for too long. That's riverine operational doctrine, Rourke continued. Shots made from boats or unstable platforms through variable atmospheric conditions. It's specialized training that only one program in the entire U.S. military ever developed. The crowd began to shift, uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. They were starting to realize that this wasn't about equipment or luck. This was about something deeper, something they didn't understand. And they were about to discover exactly who had been standing among them all along.
The atmosphere at Fort Hemlock had shifted from confident mockery to something darker and more desperate. Egos that had been fed by expensive equipment and carefully curated credentials were now starving for validation. And starving things become dangerous. Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow stood near the main pavilion, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. He'd spent years building his reputation as one of the facility's top instructors, years of collecting sponsorships and social media followers, years of believing that his equipment and training made him elite. And in the span of a few hours, a woman with a rifle older than most of the operators here had made him look ordinary. He couldn't let it stand. One more challenge, Harlow announced, his voice carrying across the facility with forced confidence. He stepped into the center of the gathering crowd, positioning himself where everyone could see him. The shots she made were impressive, I'll give her that, but they were static challenges, with time to think and calculate. Real combat shooting isn't about perfect conditions and preparation time. He turned to face Leah, who was calmly cleaning her rifle at her station, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. I challenge you to a reaction drill. Pop-up targets at unknown distances, unknown angles, real-world combat simulation. First shooter to engage and neutralize all targets wins. No time to calculate, no time to prepare, just raw skill and instinct. The crowd murmured with renewed interest. This made sense to them. This was where modern training and equipment would matter. Leah might have gotten lucky with prepared shots, but rapid target acquisition in chaotic conditions required the kind of training that cost serious money and time. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton saw an opportunity to salvage something from this disaster. I'll authorize it as an official facility challenge, standard combat simulation parameters. 10 targets at ranges from 50 to 400 meters, appearing in random sequence with 5-second exposure windows. Miss a target or take longer than 30 seconds total, you lose. Captain Donovan Reed, still pale from losing $20,000, added his voice to the chorus. This is where equipment actually matters. Rapid target acquisition requires advanced optics, quick adjust turrets, the kind of gear that costs real money and time. Your museum piece might work for carefully planned shots, but not for this. Leah set down her cleaning cloth and looked up at Harlow. Her expression was calm, almost curious, like she was observing an interesting natural phenomenon rather than being challenged to a duel. What are the stakes? Harlow hadn't expected the question. He'd assumed she'd refuse, giving him a face-saving way to dismiss her earlier performances. Now he had to put something real on the line. My reputation, he said finally. I win, you acknowledge that your earlier shots were luck and that real combat shooting requires professional training and equipment. You win, he paused, the words catching in his throat. You win, and I'll publicly state that equipment doesn't matter as much as skill. The crowd went silent. For someone like Harlow, whose entire identity and income were built on equipment reviews and sponsored content, that admission would be career suicide. He was betting everything on this challenge. Leah stood up, shouldering her rifle with that same unhurried grace she'd shown all day. Deal. The combat simulation range was Fort Hemlock's pride and joy, a $1 million facility with pop-up targets controlled by sophisticated computers designed to replicate the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat. The targets appeared at random intervals and locations, forcing shooters to locate, identify, and engage threats under time pressure. Harlow went first. He'd run this course hundreds of times, knew every possible target location, had optimized his equipment specifically for this challenge. His rifle was a custom-built AR-10 platform with a variable power scope that could transition from close to medium range with a twist of the dial. The buzzer sounded, targets began popping up in random sequence. Close, far, angled, partially obscured. Harlow moved with practiced efficiency, his rifle tracking smoothly from target to target. His shots were fast and accurate, each engagement taking 2 to 3 seconds. Target after target fell. His breathing was controlled, his movements economical, and his confidence returning with each successful hit. This was what he'd trained for. This was where modern equipment and professional instruction showed their value. The final target appeared at 380 meters, partially obscured by a simulated wall. Harlow's scope dialed to maximum magnification, his crosshairs found the visible portion of the target, and he squeezed the trigger.
Hit. The electronic system confirmed it immediately. Total time? 26.4 seconds. All 10 targets engaged successfully. The crowd erupted in genuine approval. That was an exceptional performance, the kind that validated everything they believed about training and equipment. Several operators clapped Harlow on the back, their confidence partially restored. "Let's see your antique match that," Harlow said, his grin returning as he stepped off the line. "That's what real training looks like." Leah approached the firing line, her M4A1 looking almost absurdly outdated compared to Harlow's high-tech platform. Fixed power scope, bolt action operation, no quick adjustments, no rapid follow-up shots, no modern conveniences. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke watched from the tower, his hands gripping the railing. He'd seen the classified footage from Southeast Asia. He'd read the after-action reports that described engagement sequences that defied conventional doctrine. He knew what was coming, but even he wasn't prepared for what happened next. The buzzer sounded. The first target appeared at 150 meters. Before most shooters would have even acquired it in their scope, Leah's rifle cracked with authority. The target dropped. Second target, 75 meters, angled left. The bolt cycled with mechanical precision. Crack. Target down. Third target, 320 meters, partially obscured. The rifle spoke again, without hesitation. Hit confirmed. The crowd's murmurs of approval died in their throats. She was moving faster than Harlow, engaging targets with a bolt-action rifle at speeds that shouldn't be possible. Each shot required her to break her sight picture, cycle the bolt, reacquire the target, and fire again. It should have been slower, clumsy, handicapped by outdated technology. But she was faster. Fourth, fifth, sixth targets fell in rapid succession. Her movements flowed like water, each action seamlessly transitioning into the next. The bolt manipulation was so smooth, it looked almost mechanical, her hands moving with the kind of speed that came from muscle memory built over thousands of repetitions. Seventh target appeared at 400 meters, the maximum range for the course. Most shooters took 5 or 6 seconds to engage targets at that distance, needing time to adjust for wind and elevation. Leah's rifle cracked immediately. Target down. 8th, 9th, 10th. Each engagement took less than 2 seconds. The rifle cycled with rhythmic precision, each shot placed with surgical accuracy despite the speed. The electronic timer displayed the result. 18.1 seconds. All targets engaged, all hits confirmed.
The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear individual heartbeats. Leah had beaten Harlow's time by over 8 seconds with a bolt-action rifle against a semi-automatic platform specifically designed for rapid target engagement. It wasn't just impressive, it was impossible. Harlow stood frozen, his expensive rifle hanging loose in his hands. His mouth worked soundlessly, trying to find words that could explain what had just happened. His entire understanding of marksmanship, built over decades of training and hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment, had just been demolished by a woman with a rifle that should have been in a display case. Captain Donovan Reed's phone slipped from his nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete. He'd been recording, planning to post this to his social media channels as proof that modern equipment and training mattered. Now the footage showed something that would destroy every argument he had ever made about the importance of gear. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton stood at the control station, her face drained of color. She had tried to exclude this woman from the facility. She had mocked her equipment, questioned her credentials, done everything possible to maintain the hierarchy that made her feel superior. And she had just watched that woman perform at a level that most operators couldn't achieve with unlimited time and resources. Corporal Silas Vaughn, who'd recorded Leah's arrival with mocking commentary about her museum piece, deleted the video from his phone with shaking hands. The last thing he wanted was evidence of his own stupidity going viral. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke descended from the tower, his weathered face grave. The time had come to say what needed to be said, to reveal the truth that would change everything.
Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke walked through the stunned crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. Operators stepped aside without conscious thought, their faces still frozen in expressions of disbelief. He carried a manila folder marked with classification stamps that most people in the facility would never have clearance to see. 23 years I've been in this business, Rourke began, his voice carrying the weight of decades in special operations. I've trained with the best shooters in every branch of the military. I've seen Olympic-level marksmen, competition champions who've set world records, and combat operators with confirmed kills that would make your blood run cold. He stopped in the center of the pavilion, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Leah. And in all those years, I've only seen one person shoot like that. They called her the Riverine Shade. The name hung in the air like a ghost materializing from legend. Several of the older operators went pale, recognition dawning on their faces. The younger ones looked confused, but the confusion was quickly replaced by growing dread as they processed the implications. Retired Brigadier General Tobias Whitmore pushed through the crowd, his face showing recognition that bordered on shock. He was in his 70s now, his uniform replaced by civilian clothes, but his bearings still carried the authority of someone who'd commanded armies. His hands trembled slightly as he approached. "That's not possible," Whitmore said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Shade was declared KIA in 2018, Myanmar border operation. The entire team was wiped out." Rourke opened the folder and pulled out a photograph, its edges worn from handling. The image showed a satellite view of a river valley, thermal imaging overlaid on the landscape. 17 heat signatures were marked with red X's. A single blue signature moved through the terrain like smoke, impossible to track, appearing and disappearing in ways that suggested either equipment malfunction or something that defied conventional understanding. "That's from Operation Midnight Tide," Rourke said, classified above top secret. A single operator eliminated an entire enemy command structure in 48 hours, shots made from distances and angles that our own analysts said were impossible. Through triple canopy jungle, across water, in weather conditions that should have made precision shooting fantasy. He pulled out another document, this one heavily redacted. The after-action report describes techniques that don't appear in any military manual. Compensation for atmospheric refraction over water,
shots made from unstable platforms with hand-calculated adjustments, target acquisition speeds that exceeded anything we'd seen before or since. Captain Donovan Reed found his voice, though it came out weak and hollow. If this operator was so legendary, why don't we know about them? Why isn't this person famous? Because fame gets operators killed, Whitmore answered, stepping closer to examine the documents Rourke was displaying. The shade wasn't just effective, she was too effective. 3 different foreign intelligence agencies put bounties on her head, totaling $5 million. Active contracts that are probably still in effect today. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton's face had gone from pale to gray. She, the shade, was a woman? Gender was classified to protect operational security, Rourke confirmed. The enemy was looking for a male operator, like everyone always assumes. That assumption bought her years of operational effectiveness. He pulled out a final document, a training certificate that made several operators gasp when they saw the signature at the bottom. Leah Brennan, graduated from the Strategic Reconnaissance Program in 2012. Primary instructor, classified. Operational designation, Riverine Shade. Status, active reserve. Strategic asset classification.
Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow sank into a chair, his face in his hands. His entire career was built on social media content about equipment and training. He'd just lost a public challenge to someone using gear he'd literally called obsolete in dozens of videos. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful. Tommy Weston stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming down his face. "My dad knew," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "He met her in Thailand. He tried to tell me, but I thought it was just stories. He said the shade saved his entire unit, said she made a shot across a river that nobody believed was possible until they found the body." Leah had remained silent through this entire revelation, her expression unchanged, her rifle still in her hands. Now she set it down carefully and turned to face the crowd. "I didn't come here to prove anything," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying across the stunned silence. "I came here to maintain my skills, to stay sharp in case my country needs me again. I didn't ask for your respect, and I didn't need your approval." She looked at Thornton, and the lieutenant colonel actually took a step back. "You tried to exclude me based on my appearance and equipment. You saw worn gear and assumed incompetence. You measured worth in dollars spent rather than skills earned." Her gaze shifted to Reed. "You challenged me to impossible tests designed to humiliate me, not because you cared about skill, but because you needed to protect your ego and your sponsorship deals." Then to Harlow. "And you built an entire career convincing people that equipment matters more than training, that expensive gear is the path to excellence. But the truth is, real skill transcends equipment. Real expertise doesn't need the latest technology to be effective." General Whitmore stepped forward, his weathered face showing something between respect and regret. "Miss Brennan, I served with your instructors in the Strategic Reconnaissance Program. I was in the briefing room when they showed us footage of your work. I argued against the program's dissolution because I knew we were losing something irreplaceable." He turned to address the crowd. "This operator has more confirmed strategic eliminations than everyone in this facility combined. She's operated in 12 different countries under conditions that would have gotten most of you killed in the first hour. And she did it all without needing validation or recognition." Rourke held up the training certification one more time. "This mark here," he pointed to a small notation on the document, "indicates that her instructor's final assessment rated her skills as exceeding those of her teachers. That's never happened before or since in any special operations training program." Corporal Silas Vaughn, who'd mocked her boots and rifle just hours earlier, stepped forward with trembling hands. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. There's no excuse for how I treated you. I judged you based on appearances and assumptions, and I was completely wrong." Others began to follow,
a line forming of operators wanting to apologize, to somehow make amends for their earlier cruelty. But Leah raised her hand, stopping them. "I don't need your apologies," she said. "What I need is for you to learn from this, to understand that real excellence doesn't announce itself, that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most dangerous, that character and skill can't be bought with money or credentials." She picked up her rifle, cradling it with the same reverence she'd shown all day. "This rifle was carried by my instructor in Vietnam. It's seen combat in 7 different conflicts. It's made shots that shaped history. And everyone here dismissed it as obsolete because it doesn't have the latest accessories." The silence was absolute. Every phone had stopped recording. Every smug expression had disappeared. The facility's entire hierarchy had been inverted in the span of a few hours, and nothing would ever be the same.
The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the Tennessee sky in shades of amber and crimson. But the beauty of the sunset was lost on the operators gathered at Fort Hemlock, who were too busy processing the destruction of their worldview to notice the changing light. Major General Evelyn Marsh arrived in a black SUV with government plates, flanked by 2 serious-looking men in suits who screamed federal intelligence even without saying a word. She was in her 50s, her uniform crisp despite the heat, her bearing suggesting someone who'd spent decades making decisions that affected national security. She walked directly to Leah, ignoring the crowd of stunned operators. "Miss Brennan, I apologize for the circumstances that made this revelation necessary. Your operational security was compromised the moment you set foot in this facility." Leah shouldered her rifle, her expression unchanged. "I knew the risks when I registered, General. I came here because maintaining skills requires practice, and civilian ranges don't offer the challenge levels I need." Marsh turned to face the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces of operators who suddenly felt very small. "I'm here to make several things crystal clear. First, everything you've learned about Miss Brennan's identity and service record today is classified. Any discussion of her operational history outside this facility is a federal crime punishable by up to 10 years in prison." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Several operators who'd been planning to post about today's events on social media suddenly found their phones very interesting to stare at. "Second," Marsh continued, her voice dropping to something colder, "there will be consequences for what happened here today. Lieutenant Colonel Thornton, you attempted to exclude a strategic asset from a facility specifically designed for advanced training. That's not just poor judgment, that's a dereliction of duty." Thornton's face went from gray to white. "General, I had no way of knowing." "You had no way of knowing because you didn't bother to do basic verification before passing judgment. You saw worn equipment and made assumptions. You exercised authority based on superficial criteria rather than actual assessment. That's not leadership, that's ego." She pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be a personnel file. "As of this moment, you're being transferred to administrative duties pending a full review. Your security clearance is suspended, and you're prohibited from any training oversight until further notice." Thornton stood frozen. Her career effectively ended in the span of 30 seconds. Years of service, of climbing the ranks, of building her reputation, all demolished because she'd chosen mockery over verification. Marsh turned her attention to Captain Donovan Reed, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. "Captain Reed, you challenged a strategic asset to what you designed as a humiliation exercise. You wagered $20,000 on her failure for your own entertainment and social media content." Reed's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His sponsorship deals, his social media following, his entire carefully constructed brand was built on the premise that equipment and credentials mattered most, and he'd just been publicly destroyed by someone with neither. "Your conduct reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes an effective operator. You've confused wealth with worth and volume with value. Your facility privileges are revoked. Any content you post about today's events will result in federal prosecution."
Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow stood at attention, his face pale, waiting for his turn in the guillotine. Marsh studied him for a long moment before speaking. Sergeant Harlow, you built a career teaching others that equipment matters more than skill. You've profited from convincing people that expensive gear is the path to excellence. Today proved that philosophy is fundamentally flawed. Harlow's jaw tightened, but he didn't defend himself. What defense was there? I'm not ending your career, Marsh said, surprising everyone, including Harlow. But I am requiring you to complete a recertification program focused on fundamental skills without advanced equipment. You'll learn what real expertise looks like, or you'll find a different line of work.
She turned to address the entire crowd. Every person here today participated in or witnessed the systematic mockery and exclusion of an operator whose service record exceeds anything most of you will achieve in your entire careers. That's not just unprofessional, it's a failure of character. Retired Brigadier General Tobias Whitmore stepped forward, his voice heavy with regret. General Marsh is right. I've been thinking about what I witnessed today, and it's made me question everything we teach about military culture and respect. We train people to be warriors, but we fail to teach them that true strength doesn't need to announce itself. He turned to face the crowd. I commanded troops in 3 different theaters. I've seen heroes who looked nothing like what Hollywood told us heroes should look like. And I've seen cowards wearing the uniforms and carrying the credentials of the elite. Today, you all learned the difference. Tommy Weston, the young range assistant, approached Leah with the $20,000 she'd won and immediately donated. Ma'am, the facility director said this money will fund scholarships for kids who want to learn marksmanship but can't afford equipment. Because of you, maybe 100 kids will get the chance my dad wanted me to have. Leah's expression softened slightly. Your father was a good man, Tommy. He understood what most people here forgot, that equipment is just tools. It's the person using them that matters. Corporal Silas Vaughn pushed through the crowd, his face red with shame. Ma'am, I recorded you when you arrived, made fun of your truck, your gear, everything. I was going to post it as comedy content. I deleted it, but I need you to know how sorry I am, not just for recording, but for being the kind of person who thought that was acceptable. Leah studied him for a moment. You learned something today. The question is whether you'll remember it tomorrow, next week, next year. Character isn't about one moment of shame. It's about what you do with that shame afterward. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke approached with a folder containing facility records. General, for what it's worth, Miss Brennan's performance today set new facility records in 4 different categories: the reflex test, the impossible shot challenge, the combat simulation, all of them, by significant margins. Marsh nodded. Those records will remain classified. We don't need her name on public boards attracting attention from foreign intelligence services who still have active contracts on her head. The weight of that statement settled over the crowd like a shroud. They'd been mocking someone who had prices on her head from hostile governments, someone whose identity was so sensitive that revealing it could trigger international incidents. General Whitmore pulled out a faded photograph from his wallet, its edges worn from years of carrying. This was taken in 2015, Cambodia, a joint operation that officially never happened. My team was pinned down by enemy fire from a fortified position across a river. We had no support, no extraction, and about 20 minutes before we were overrun. He held up the photo showing a river valley at dusk. One shot. From over 800 meters away, across moving water, in failing light. The enemy commander dropped and his entire unit retreated thinking they were being engaged by a larger force. My entire team made it home because of that shot. He looked at Leah, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I never got to thank the operator who made that shot. I was told they were KIA 2 years later. Today, I learned they survived.
And I learned that I owe my life to the woman this facility tried to throw out like garbage. The silence that followed was crushing. These operators, who'd spent the day feeding their egos with mockery and cruelty, were now facing the reality that they'd tried to humiliate someone who'd saved American lives in operations they'd never hear about. Leah picked up her rifle case, preparing to leave. I came here to train. I did what I came to do. What you do with today's lessons is up to you. She walked towards her truck, and the crowd parted like water around a stone. Nobody spoke, nobody tried to stop her. They just watched as the woman they'd dismissed as a pretender drove away in her beat-up Ford Ranger, disappearing into the Tennessee evening like smoke.
3 hours after Leah Brennan drove away from Fort Hemlock, the facility was still processing what had happened. Operators sat in small groups, their expensive rifles propped against tables, their conversations subdued and reflective. The swagger and bravado that had filled the air that morning had evaporated, replaced by something closer to humility. Tommy Weston sat on a bench near the main pavilion, the $20,000 secured in the facility safe, already designated for the Junior Marksmanship Scholarship Fund. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother, asking how his day had been. He stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to explain that he'd met a legend his father had told him about for years, and that everything his father had said was true. Master Sergeant Clayton Rourke stood in his office, looking at the classified documents he'd need to return to secure storage. The file on the Riverine Shade was thin, most of it redacted, but what remained told a story of operational excellence that most people would never believe. 17 confirmed strategic eliminations in 48 hours. Shots made across rivers and storm conditions. Targets engaged from unstable platforms with calculations that defied conventional ballistics. And she'd done it all without needing recognition or validation. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a Pentagon extension. Work? Master Sergeant, this is Colonel Vance from Strategic Operations. I understand you had an interesting day at your facility. That's one way to put it, sir. The Shade's cover is compromised. We're implementing new protocols, but I wanted to thank you for handling the situation appropriately. Not everyone would have recognized what they were seeing. Rourke thought about that morning, about watching Leah clean her rifle while operators mocked her equipment. Sir, with respect, I almost didn't recognize it. If I hadn't seen that mark on her rifle stock, the signature her instructor carved, I might have dismissed her like everyone else. That's the point, Sergeant. Real excellence doesn't announce itself. The most dangerous operators are the ones you never see coming. After the call ended, Rourke walked out to the main range. The sun had set fully now, and the facility lights created pools of illumination in the darkness. Several operators were still there, running drills with a new intensity. He recognized the shift in their behavior. They were training differently now, focusing on fundamentals rather than equipment, on precision rather than speed for its own sake. One lesson, delivered in the most brutal way possible, had changed the facility's entire culture. In a coffee shop 200 miles away, Leah sat in a corner booth with her laptop open, reviewing training protocols for a contract she'd accepted 3 weeks ago. The job was classified, naturally, they all were. Something about a hostage situation in a country that didn't officially acknowledge American military presence. Her phone buzzed with a message from General Marsh. Your performance today was noted at the highest levels. Stand ready for possible activation within 72 hours. Leah deleted the message and closed her laptop. She looked out the window at the ordinary people walking past, living ordinary lives, completely unaware that the quiet woman in the corner booth had probably saved more American lives than they'd ever know. That was fine with her. Fame was for people who needed validation. She just needed to be good at her job. Back at Fort Hemlock, Captain Donovan Reed sat in his truck in the parking lot, staring at his phone. His social media accounts were flooded with messages from sponsors wanting to know why he'd gone silent. His followers were demanding new content. His entire business model depended on constant output, constant engagement, constant validation of the premise that expensive equipment led to superior performance. But he couldn't post anything. Not just because of the classification requirements, but because he no longer believed his own message. He'd seen someone with a rifle worth maybe $1,500 outshoot operators with $20,000 platforms. He'd watched technique and training trump technology and equipment so decisively that defending his previous position felt like lying. His career was over. Not officially, but practically. He couldn't go back to making videos about equipment being the key to excellence. Not after today.
Staff Sergeant Quinn Harlow made a different choice. He started a new video that night, that one that would cost him followers and sponsors, but that he knew he needed to make.
"I've been teaching tactical shooting for 12 years, he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. And I've been teaching it wrong. I built a career convincing people that expensive equipment was the path to excellence, that the right scope, the right rifle, the right accessories would make them better shooters." He paused, choosing his words carefully without violating classification. "Today, I met someone who proved me wrong. Someone with outdated equipment and decades of experience. Someone who could outshoot everyone at an elite facility using gear that cost less than most of our optics. And it made me realize that I've been selling people a lie." The video would cost him half his sponsors within a week, but it would also start a conversation in the tactical shooting community about fundamentals versus equipment, about skill versus spending, about character versus credentials. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce Thornton sat in her empty office, her personal effects already boxed up, her transfer orders on the desk. She'd spent 20 years building her career, and it had ended in a single afternoon because she'd chosen mockery over verification, ego over evaluation. She thought about Leah's words. "You saw worn gear and assumed incompetence. You measured worth in dollars spent rather than skills earned." It was true. All of it. And the worst part was that she'd trained an entire generation of operators to think the same way. How many talented people had she dismissed because they didn't fit her image of what excellence should look like? How many opportunities had she squandered because her ego needed constant feeding? The questions would haunt her for years. Tommy Weston walked out to the range just before closing, carrying his father's old rifle. It wasn't fancy, no custom build, no expensive optics, just a reliable bolt-action that his father had carried for 20 years. Master Sergeant Rourke found him there, settling into a shooting position with careful attention to fundamentals. "Your dad would be proud," Rourke said quietly. Tommy looked up, his eyes bright. She was real. Everything he told me was real. The riverine shade, the impossible shots, all of it. "Your dad was a good judge of character. He recognized excellence when he saw it, even when it didn't look the way people expected." "Master Sergeant, do you think I could ever be that good?" Rourke considered the question carefully. "It depends on what you're willing to sacrifice, how hard you're willing to work, and whether you're doing it for the right reasons. The Shade didn't become legendary by chasing fame or validation. She became legendary by pursuing excellence for its own sake, even when nobody was watching." Somewhere in the Tennessee night, Leah Brennan pulled into a small motel parking lot. She carried her rifle case and backpack to her room, the same worn gear that had been mocked just hours earlier. She cleaned her rifle one more time, the ritual soothing and familiar, then made notes in her journal about the day's shooting conditions and performance. Tomorrow she'd drive to another facility, or another range, or wherever her training protocols required. She'd continue honing skills that most people didn't know existed, maintaining readiness for missions that officially never happened, serving a country that could never publicly acknowledge what she did. And she'd do it all without needing anyone's approval or validation. Because real strength didn't need to announce itself.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.